Let's talk about finance. And probably some people now think, oh, please, no, anything but not finance. And that's exactly the point of what we're going to talk about today. As soon as we talk about finance, people usually tune off. They zone out. They say, no, none of my business. We have a department for that. And we see that finance knowledge is not very present in our education system. It's usually not very prevalent, not very present, not the main center of attention. Still, as soon as we enter the real life outside our school and university education, very quickly finance has become absolutely imminent and absolutely important for us. So while the financial knowledge in private is not very, let's say, not great in general in society, it isn't much better in real-world enterprise as well. Because as soon as you say, well, here's a finance aspect, people say, wait, I am not a finance person. I am not a finance leader. I'm not a finance manager. I'm not a finance person. I'm not a financer. Whatever you hear, people very quickly turn away and say, that's not for me. The problem with that is we need to question if this statement is acceptable and sustainable for an organization. Because when people say, I'm not a finance manager, but yet you're still leading a department, is that even possible? So we need to talk about, is this statement acceptable and sustainable for an organization when people say, I am not a finance XYZ? So first, let's get to the background. Often people turn away from finance because they say they didn't have any formal qualification on finance. And there's a reason why that kind of argument, that kind of reasoning doesn't age very well. I give you a very simple example. In London, we have the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, and that found out in a global study, 82% of all leaders had 0 minutes, 0 seconds of leadership training, coaching, mentoring, name it as you like. So when you say, I don't touch finance because I didn't get formal education on finance, when you didn't have any formal education on leadership, you can't lead people. And that's exactly what no one does, because people think, oh, I don't know anything about finance, so I'm not touching it. And as soon as you get promoted and say, oh, leadership, yeah, I just lead people. Never got any formal education on that. Don't know what I'm doing, but I'm still trying it. And you would never allow anything like that with finance. So you cannot say, I'm not touching finance due to a lack of formal education. At the same time, I'm leading people without having exactly the same non-education on leadership. So this whole I don't have formal education is not a valid argument, not a valid reasoning in this context. The reality is different. Often people feel intimidated or they feel discomfort due to the terms they hear. When you, for the very first time, hear weighted average cost of capital, and I can tell you when I did my MBA in London in the United Kingdom and finance was the first module, I didn't sit there and say, yay, finally someone tells me what weighted average cost of capital is. However, after the MBA, I know that I am now a way better leader and manager with the financial knowledge that I actually have. But the terms, the complexity, the amount of terms, of course, can be a bit off-putting. However, in addition to that, often there is a certain role perception that people simply say, it's none of my business. They say, we have a finance department and anything with finance is their business, not mine. So they just brush it off. And that, unfortunately, often comes due to an organizational culture. An organizational culture where people say, it's none of my business as soon as I hear the word finance, and then people suddenly accept that. And again, we now have to look into, are there any parallels, anything where we can allude to where that kind of behavior would not be accepted? And you very quickly find that. Remember when back in the days, people, and I just give you one role now, when someone said, oh, I don't have to do sales work. I work in HR. And then modern organizations at a certain point said, as soon as you have someone on the phone or in your contact list, or you contact anyone that could become probably a client, a mandate, piece of business, or someone who's going to work for us, you are in some sort of sales process. So you need to change your mind on that. You need a more modern thinking, a different mindset on the matter. And modern organizations change their mindset on these matters. However, in finance, people could still say, no, none of my business. I work in engineering. I don't have to do finance. And that is often commonly accepted. By the way, not with all organizations. Just last week, I was with an organization and I had a whole class of people. All of them had 100% background in technology, from people who had the German Meisterbrief, from people who had vocational training, up to people who had bachelor's and master's degree in technical jobs and engineering. All of them saying, I have absolutely no idea about the economical background and finance. And that might sound strange to you, especially when you're self-employed and you're listening to this. You just think, people just get a general gist of it. So people know what's the difference between revenue, loss, income statement, cash flow statement, all of that, profit and loss statement. No, they don't. I had people who couldn't explain the difference between an LLC and an incorporated company, or let's say for the UK, a limited and a PLC. Absolutely no idea. And they had no idea what's the difference, why some people are a sole trader or a limited company. They had no idea why this exists. And let's face it, this is not surprising, because if anyone would ask people like us, and I include myself here, about engineering stuff, where engineers simply say, well, when you drive cars, you probably looked at how engines work, don't you? Because you're interested. And most of us don't. I can't tell you why an engine is working and why a car is driving forward with it. So that is exactly the same. We have to see that organizational cultures often focus on specialists, which is good in the first place, but then often allow people to brush things off, which are important for their jobs. So what do we have to do now in reality? So first, we have to accept every single decision has a financial impact. Every single one. Every decision you make has a financial side to it. And when you now say, well, I'm just some sort of low-level manager, I talk to people and try to make them take customer phone calls and complaints and to solve them as quickly as possible. I give you a very simple example. When you have a chat with an employee, and this chat goes better or worse, after this chat, the person is more motivated or less motivated, more motivated to help clients or less motivated, more motivated to work an hour extra or even 10 minutes extra, or not motivated, hangs up in the middle of a chat. That immediately has a financial aspect to it, because motivation goes into productivity, and productivity immediately affects the bottom line, your balance sheet of your organization. And by the way, it is not relevant if you are an organization for profit or non-profit. It is not relevant if you are Greenpeace or BlackRock. Every single one of your organizations, every single organization on this planet, for profit or not for profit or non-profit, every single one of them need money. As soon as you run out of money, the doors are closed, and that was it. It is the common denominator we all have in common. So that means you have to accept every decision has a financial aspect. And budget ownership also means financial responsibility. Maybe you don't have financial accountability, you might claim. However, let's face it, let's say you're a department leader and you plan your training budget, and then you see that the training budget wasn't really a fit, so you have to get another budget. Do you think that at the end of the year with accountability, they go to the finance department and ask them why you assumed the wrong amount of training? No, they're going to go to you. So you do not only have financial responsibility, you also have financial accountability, if you like it or not. By the way, even on very low level. In addition to that, you need to have strategic alignment. You need to have some sort of similar behavior across different departments. When you, for example, have two production facilities and they are next door to each other, both belong to your company, and in one facility, someone says, I need technical training, and that person gets the training. And next door, a quite similar person or totally similar person asks the same question and doesn't get the training. Very quickly, it will make the round. Which manager is the one that invests in their people, and which manager is the one that just pushes the profit in the short run, and then they run out of skills in the future, but they don't care. That manager went on and went to a different organization, but they got a nice bonus of it because they didn't spend money in the first place. Very quickly, people as managers and leaders will have a reputation. You need strategic alignment, and again, that has a financial aspect to it. In addition to all of that, accountability and performance of you will be measured by KPIs. At the end, people will say, when you run an IT department, how did this help the business? When you run production or engineering, when you run the bookkeeping, when you run when you are a team of secretaries, people will say, hey, how did you support the business? Bring the numbers to the table. So when, for example, you have 40 days of absenteeism per year, which has a massive financial impact, and you can reduce that to 32 successfully 3 years in a row, then people will say that you did well, including financially well. You saved the business money. And most likely, by the way, financial aspect here, you will ask for a salary raise in return because you managed and led so well. So you see on a very low level already of every single tiny bit happening on the organization, you need to have financial knowledge. And by the way, overarching on top of all of that, Stakeholder expectations always have a financial aspect. Stakeholders might be people who are physically owning the company, people who founded the company, people who hold shares in it, but also might be politicians, might be the general public, depending on what kind of organizations you are. So stakeholder expectations always have an aspect of financial resources should be dealt with well. And just look into politics. As soon as a penny is wasted, people go wild and say, how can my taxpayers' money can be handled that badly? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Stakeholder expectations exist anywhere. So when you say you're a non-finance person, that is not a sustainable and acceptable statement. So how can we change that? So first, you need professional training. And with the professional training, you need some sort of either coaching or mentoring to apply that knowledge to the level and the extent you need to. By the way, be realistic, and that's an important point here as well. Be realistic about the goal you're setting. You can be ambitious, of course, and you should be. However, when you now listen to this podcast and say, hey, I have this great idea, every single manager now in our company will be a chartered accountant. They have to get the qualification. I can tell you they will leave the organization because that is too much knowledge. It's more knowledge than they need to have. People don't want to work as chartered accountants when they're in engineering. Otherwise, they would be, surprise, chartered accountants. So you have to be realistic, ambitious about the goal you set. When people now say, hey, I want to have the management accountant degree, or I want to get my MBA with a share in finance, or even fully in finance, most likely with a share in finance, or people say, hey, I want to get the basic accounting qualification to understand what's going on here, encourage them, support it, and help them to get these qualifications, because the more people understand, the better they work. Always, when people volunteer, you need to be a company awarding them something for it. As soon as people volunteer and they see, oh, no one's appreciating it, then they will stop volunteering, and most likely they will volunteer to work somewhere else. And then you have a massive financial impact with that. In addition to all of that, you need to have a cultural expectation that finance is a part of every single person's job. I give you a very simple aspect of what I, for example, did in my business. In my industry, it is pretty common that what people get their commission on when they work in sales, they get commission on the revenue. And I never did that. Because what happened is, as soon as people are close to getting the deal, they're starting to throw things at clients and say, oh, you get free books and you get a free this and a free that. Because as soon as they get the revenue, they get their commission on the revenue. But they lowered the profit massively just by giving away all of these free gifts. However, when you then suddenly explain them how actually from the revenue to the profit point of view does the whole thing develop, and we did that, and then you tell them your commission will be based on the profit that you make. In return, you get a higher commission because you need a bit more qualification here. Then people act better and more sustainable, not only in favor of the client, but also in favor of the organization, meeting exactly the best point with the best solution for both parties involved here. Wrapping all of this together, when you have this cultural expectation now in place, we have to say there is no non-finance leader. There is no non-finance manager. It simply doesn't exist. Saying finance is not my thing is a non-sustainable and also, unfortunately, I have to say, non-acceptable statement for any kind of leader. You do not have the CFO level expert, but you need to know what's going on when you are on a very junior position where you have nothing to say when it comes to leadership. Regarding leadership, you have no team, you have no one to lead, and you do not have any kind of budget. When you then say, finance is not my thing, fair enough, you can say that. It's probably not a push for your career, probably not the best attitude, but when you say, I'm happy where I am and I want to keep that job exactly as it is, then of course you can do exactly that. For anyone else who has any kind of attitude towards a career, towards a promotion, as soon as you have the tiniest bit of leadership job, finance is relevant to you. Finance is relevant for absolutely anyone, anytime, anywhere, especially when you're leading people, managing people, or hopefully doing both. And I'm wishing you all the best implementing what I just told you. And when you now say, oh, that sounds like a lot of work, and I have to admit it definitely is, feel free to contact me. nb@nb-networks.com is my email address. Feel free to email me there. I will put my email address in the show notes of this podcast. I will put my LinkedIn there as well. Feel free to connect with me on there. And I also will put my website on there, nb-networks.biz. You also find the transcript of the whole podcast in on this website. Second aspect here, if you want to have live sessions, yes, we have them. We just had one. expert.nb-networks.com. As soon as you go to the expert.nb-networks.com website, you can just put your email address in there. Then you're registered for the leadership letter. You only receive one email every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. In there is full access, nothing to pay, no paywall, nothing. Full access to all the articles. Full access to all the podcast and the date, the time, and the link to our next live session. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, and thank you very much for signing up. By the way, also thank you very much to all the people who reached out to us, because many people saw that we changed the design of our the leadership letter. And there's a reason for that. We always were focusing on accessibility. That is the reason why we never had any kind of fancy graphic chumbawamba around. It might not be the most fancy newsletter. It might be the least fancy expert leadership letter you ever saw. However, it's all about the content, and we want to give access to absolutely anyone and not exclude anyone based on limitations which are beyond their control. And now we optimize that even further. It's now, of course, very modest from a design point of view, but it's accessible for absolutely anyone. And I thank you for the overwhelming positive feedback we received. And also, which is amazing, the opening rate almost doubled from last week to this week. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to being in contact with you with all the discussions we had here. Many emails arrived in my inbox. Thank you very much. So I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you here as well. The most important aspect, however, is the third one. Apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects that you obviously want to see in your organizations. I wish you all the best doing so. If you need help, let me know. Available 24/7, anytime. And as soon as you say, hey, I think I need something, just drop me an email or contact me on any other means of communication. I'm answering every single message within 24 hours or less, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. At the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.